Well, good morning. My name is Jim Haudan. I'm the chairman and co-founder of Root Inc., and it's my pleasure today to bring two of my favorite senior executives into a conversation that we started several weeks ago, and that is, how do leaders lead during times like this? And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rick Lofgren and Charlie Piscitello. I'd like to introduce both of them personally, and then ask them to introduce themselves professionally. But I'll start with Dr. Rick Lofgren. I've worked with many healthcare organizations, and I can't think of a leader that's more authentic in the way that he wants to transform healthcare, and spends every day thinking about how to, enhance health and reduce suffering. To do that through the current health system, he's just a fabulous leader, and quite candidly, one of the top leaders that I've seen that tries to exhibit that transformative change in every day of his life with his teams and all the way down to the patients he serves. So, Rick, it's a pleasure to be here. If you don't mind, could you also introduce your background professionally?
Sure. Thank you, Jim, and I appreciate having the opportunity to participate in this, and humbled by the opportunity. I'm a general internist by trade. I've spent my entire career in academic medicine. I jokingly say that I started my career actually from an academic standpoint, looking at the impact of health systems on patient outcomes. And I woke up one day and I was leading them, and I'm not sure exactly how that transition occurred. But I have actually had the experience of being a very busy practicing primary care general internist, then running large group practices, and then being ultimately running health systems from an operational standpoint, and then ultimately leading health systems here. A variety of institutions throughout the Midwest, starting from in my time at Ann Arbor to Minnesota to Pittsburgh to Milwaukee and the like.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Lofgren. It's again a pleasure to have you. Also with us this morning is Charlie Piscitello. I believe probably over my career, I've had a chance to work with over 500 leaders, especially leaders in the human capital space, whether they're people leaders or CHROs and often transformative leaders. And Charlie is just one of the best. There are a few people that are as intuitive about how to lead people during all kinds of environment and times of change. And there are a few leaders that are just an expert in change, in the emotional element of change and the intellectual aspect of change, and just connects with people everywhere he goes, because he's just so in touch with the human aspect of leading change. So, Charlie, it's just a pleasure to have you this morning. And would you also mind just introducing yourself professionally?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And I'm pleased and humbled to be with you. And Dr. Lofgren, it's great to be with you as well. My background is really in, the human capital world. And I've worked in lots of industries, consumer products and healthcare and innovation and technology, financial services, and even specialty retail. So I like to think of my background as applicable to any environment, but most importantly, I've had a wonderful, blessed career and opportunity to work with so many gifted and talented people like you guys. And so I'm humbled to be here and appreciate the chance to share some thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we have a few questions we'd like to start with, but I'm excited to see wherever our conversation might take us. And I think the first question is one that's just basic and actually creates a little bit of transparency for people at all levels. And that is, where do you get your information to guide your business decisions during times like this? And sort of how do you process it? And then how do you arrive at a decision? And maybe we'll start with you, Charlie, and then go to Dr. Lofgren.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Jim. It's an interesting question because I think in a time of uncertainty, which we currently live in, there's this mythical notion that all of a sudden we don't know what's happening, right? And the truth is we always live in uncertainty. It happens to be dialed up to a greater degree and to greater severity at the moment with the COVID crisis we all find ourselves in globally. But sources of information are important for me, it's important not to change where I find things that are important in terms of data and information. I think it's don't read the daily news is probably the first rule of thumb that I apply, at least in the popular press. When we look for business information, we look for obviously credible sources. In this environment, we look to authorities. We look to the CDC. We look to environments that talk about how to safely manage your people and your human assets, as well as make business decisions. So I think fundamentally this environment creates a scenario where you go to people and sources that you trust even more frequently and even more intensely than you would in a normalized time. We're getting bombarded with information from so many different sources that we have to have the wherewithal, I think, to tune out a lot of the sources of data and information that come at us and just focus on those things that we know come from credible places, so that we can use those to objectively think about and make judgments about what do we do, how do we act, what decisions do we make relative to both our business and our people.
Dr. Lofgren, what's your insight on where you get information and how you make decisions as we look at today's environment?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is running a large academic health system. I think my position is sort of paradox from the standpoint, on one hand, I'm responsible to make sure that we are prepared to take care of the surge of patients and really to actually manage the pandemic. At the same time, I'm responsible for running a $2 billion operation, so I'm very much involved in the business element as well. One of the things I just mentioned is that I do play a role in terms of preparing the state of Ohio in terms of preparing the response to the COVID surge. I serve on the governor's advisory group and responsible for the coordination of preparation for the surge within the Cincinnati region as well. So I think that I really think about this in two different lines. One is really sort of managing and where I get information to manage the actual pandemic itself. And those reliable sources, as Charlie mentioned, is there's lots of information out there, and the 24/7 news cycle just actually adds confusion as people go down different blind paths about some nuances. So I do get from a variety of sources, but ones that I think are pretty consistent. So actually managing the pandemic, there is a pretty consistent data set that comes from the Ohio Hospital Association that really is pretty accurate about what's happening in terms of the activity, in terms of patients, volumes, ICU, but also a very accurate look at what's happening in terms of supply chain, in terms of ventilators and the PPE that you've all heard about. We also have the same sort of data on a regional basis, and quite honestly, we use that kind of tracking system with a fair amount of fidelity, even in our own institution. So I have a real-time look at what's happening in terms of the management of the pandemic again. When I think about the business element and how this is going to disrupt and change currently how health systems function and how we're going to function in the future, I must admit I mainly look to my reliable national organizations to find those pieces of information, such as the Association of Academic Health Systems, and really connect with other CEOs who run in other academic health systems around the country that really understand what challenges are they facing and how are they responding to them. And you really have the opportunity, I might add, is to look at what's happening in New York City versus what's happening in Missouri. So that connection and that network of people who are in the industry has been proven to be incredibly valuable. And then the final element that's actually been useful for information and particularly understanding how we're moving forward is really ongoing dialogue with external people in terms of particularly weekly conversations with the governor, other elected officials that are involved in it in terms of their lens of what they're seeing and hearing that also guides what I think the future will be with us. And the final piece of that, we actually have a very active group in our chamber that's put together of all the major industries within Cincinnati. They meet on a regular basis to talk about what's happening.
Great. Thanks. I guess the follow-up question that's right after that really I think is top of a lot of people's minds, and that is, how do you put the people's safety first with so many unknowns and with so much interest in trying to see if we can reopen the economy and or at least start to reopen it. So maybe we'll go backward this time. Rick, would you mind going first? So how do you put people's safety first with so many unknowns, looking at tomorrow and the day after and the day after?
So one of the things that I would tell you is that in the messaging and with our associates, that one of the things, really probably two key messages. One is making sure that we lead with empathy and understanding that this is truly unprecedented in that all of us have a degree of anxiety that we either express or don't express. And I think acknowledging that is very important in terms of communications around that. I think that's one of the key elements to that. Are there other pieces of that you're interested in knowing?
When it comes to associate safety, where do you say we're going to go forward with this new guideline or this new rule, and we're not on this? And so, some people maybe take a very conservative approach. Some people may take a very, very liberal approach. But how do you decide what the approach is that you take?
Yeah, I think that the issue, then the other messaging is that their safety and our safety of our patients becomes actually job one, so we never deviate from that. We do follow the science, meaning that what is the recommendations and what do we know and not know in terms of that, and not try to give way to sort of the theory out there. I do think that we have a lot of information about how we actually can keep patients safe. We know a fair amount about that in terms of the use of disinfectants, the use of hand hygiene, the use of various ways of understanding barriers and like that gets the functional social distancing. I think the biggest challenge in terms of this pandemic for us from a standpoint is understanding the whole issue around masking. Because initially what happened is that the CDC told you that masks didn't work, and they don't work in terms of protecting you from the environment. But what we have learned is that the droplets that come from asymptomatic people are really an important element to that, so that masking is a way in which you protect your workforce. So we actually reinforce the things that we know are going to make a difference in terms of the guidelines. I think we also have the advantage, as opposed to other industries, is that protecting our workforce from various infectious diseases is something we've done for a long period of time. So it's a bigger part of, an easier part of our culture. What we do have to say more and more is that we're not here to cut corners, and that we're not going to have you go into a situation without the adequate amount of PPE or the adequate amount of protection. That your safety is the first thing that we're going to deal with, and it's a message we always lead with in talking to individuals about that as well.
Great, thanks. Charlie, how about from your perspective, how do you put people's safety first, your people's safety first, with so many unknowns and the pressure to restart a business, but also do it safely?
Yeah, it's a interesting and very dynamic question in the current time, because I think everyone is asking it of themselves if you're in a leadership role in an organization. Rick and I both have the blessing and the current challenge of leading in organizations involved in healthcare. We make products that serve patients who suffer from abnormal arrhythmias of the heart. And so as a medical device manufacturer, we are considered an essential business. So while we shut down early in this pandemic so that people could, we could ensure people's safety, we restarted manufacturing only a couple weeks later, but we did that in a very controlled, very thoughtful way. So all of the things Rick mentioned, entry and exit protocols, temperature screening, social distancing, redesigning the workplace so that people can maintain social distance, providing the right personal protective equipment, are all things that we put in place as we restarted our manufacturing operation to make these life-saving devices. At the same time, everybody who isn't involved in that specific work, we have encouraged and continue to encourage to work remotely so that we can maintain that social distancing protocol in the workplace. I think maintaining safety of people long-term is an important, very important topic, and I think it's going to result for us in a lot of discussions about redesigning the workplace in a way that continues to maintain people's health and well-being while minimizing the risk. It's important to note, in part of the answer to this question, is that none of us can guarantee people's total safety. But what we can do is we can put all the practices and protocols and things in place to ensure that we minimize risk to people in the case of COVID and the case of other workplace hazards. And, we're both involved in businesses that do that on a normal basis. So we've amped up our focus on that in this time, of course. Our biggest challenge, Jim, honestly, with all these protocols in place, our biggest challenge is, organizations like Rick's are my customer. So he has cardiologists who desperately want to get back to work and do these procedures because they know there are patients in need. And so we're standing ready to support them and assist them. But we can only do that if and when they have the protocols in place to be able to allow our personnel into those procedures, because we're the kind of business that requires someone to actually be in the surgery position.
Got it. Just maybe another question about our people and our associates. But, when you think about it, Charlie, I'll start with you. How do you stay connected with your people and help them stay connected to the business and where it's going, as a leader in this environment? So, and that, that means both the ones that you might have back on campus and those that are virtual and may stay virtual for a long period of time.
It's an important element of how we lead through not just crisis, but, in normalized times. I think the answer to that question is really you have to establish new operating rhythms. There's a new normal that we're all operating under in this environment. And so I don't think I've ever texted more in my life or connected with people on Zoom or made personal phone calls to people in our company. Not just because in the old way of operating, I could leave my office, walk downstairs into manufacturing or R&D and talk to somebody. Now you have to be affirmative in the way you do those things. It's not management by walking around, it's management by active connection. And so, I spend an awful lot of time just reaching out to people, just saying, hey, how's it going? What are you doing? What are you working on? How do we make sure that we're serving our customers effectively? Who have you connected with today is now a new question that I've established and I've encouraged our other leaders to establish, because we can't assume to know when we can't physically, be in the same environment with people, that we know what's on people's minds, that we know what they're thinking, that we know what their emotional frame of reference is. A time of uncertainty, people experiences thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and we can't assume we know those things. We gotta reach out and ask. So we have a daily meeting in our company at 9:00 in the morning Pacific time globally, and I lead that meeting. Our CEO and I lead that meeting today. One of the things we do is we ask people, where are you right now? And we use a little change model, a visual that says, are you in fear? Do you feel paralyzed, or do you feel a sense or an inability to act? Or do you feel like you're seeking information? Are you in information mode where you need to find the answers to things to be able to move forward? Or are you in action mode? Are you doing something that actually contributes to your own well-being, that contributes to others' well-being on your team or in your family in this case? Or are you doing something that helps the broader community? So we spend a lot of time talking about those three dimensions: care of self, care of support of others, and then making a difference in our communities. Never has there been a more important time to acknowledge, as Rick says, acknowledge those things and actively facilitate people's connection to them.
Great, thanks. Rick, how about your perspective? How do you stay connected to your people and have them stay connected to the business during times like this?
Yeah, I think that, as Charlie mentioned, I think a lot of those things are very true. When you think about a time of crisis, it's a time for the leader to be more visible than ever. And I think traditionally that's been by being physically present in the moment. And it's just Charlie said, this is represented a whole new way in which you need to be visible and using new techniques and things that I haven't used in the past. And it's sort of part of this is sort of the new normal. I think that one of the things I recognize is that in the end, our ability to really thrive through this whole pandemic is based upon the workforce. And one of the things I keep in mind as I move forward is that there's two things I think the workforce remembers during this period of time, and that is, how did you communicate with me and how did you treat me during the process? And it really highlights the importance that Charlie mentioned about, let's be realistic about the emotional connection and the connection with each other as well as the support. So I think there are a couple things I want to do that in terms of communicating with them is doing it frequently, doing it by multiple channels, as mentioned. A couple key messages is I think is important in that there really is this idea of being very clear about the realities of what the current situation is, and frankly, acknowledging the uncertainty around it, but also at the same time offering hope. So that sort of direct communication, the connection with the individual as a person, the direct communication about what the current reality is, and making sure that you lead with hope. One of the things we've done in our organization that you've actually been part of helping us, Jim, is our transformation to the UC Health Way. And one of the tools that we've implemented in the recent years is this tiered huddling, where in our organization, we start with huddles at the front line all the way up to the executive team that happens 10 minutes apiece, and it takes about 70 minutes to escalate people along. And we have talked about how fortunate it is that we had that mechanism in place when this hit, because it has been a way in which we can, from the front line all the way up to the C-suite, have information go in both directions. That's been very useful. The other thing I've needed to do is create sort of virtual huddles with my executive team on a daily basis, something that has actually been a much greater value in terms of just connecting exactly as Charlie said, how are you doing, what's going on, a time for them to actually get strength from each other in terms of the C-suite of the things they have to do. That's been really valuable. And I can tell you that's one of the things I suspect will endure after the pandemic that came along. And then the other thing that I would also say that's important that Charlie mentioned is I do much more random phone calls with leaders in the organization, frankly, most importantly, the physician leaders. And the first question is sort of, how are you doing? The second question is, how's the morale of your team? You know, how are they doing? And then finally, sort of, what are they experiencing and what are the anxieties in terms of either waiting to get back to work or being prepared for the pandemic itself?
Thanks, Rick. I'm going to slide over to Charlie. Charlie, what, I think we've often talked about how important trust is. You know, it's the currency, I think, of high performance. But, you know, in an environment like this where there are these challenges, do you have thoughts on what erodes and what builds trust during times of high fear and anxiety like we are experiencing right now?
I think the it's always a fascinating topic to discuss, because trust at the most fundamental level is built based on what you experience, right? And so none of us as human beings, allow or give or afford trust without a set of experiences to base our decision off from. So I think in this environment, in any environment, trust is built, by consistency of action, by authenticity, by sincerity, by the willingness to not just say what we know, but admit what we don't know. And as Rick mentioned, that's very important in this environment. And so whether or not your people trust you as a leader or as an organization is going to be fundamental to the experiences that they have. In this particular time, that's more important than ever because we have a new context for trust, right? Do I trust that you're keeping me safe? Do I trust that you're looking out for my well-being? Do I trust that you care about my family? These are questions that have always sort of been under the surface of working with people. Now they're right out in the open, and you have to demonstrate as leadership that those things matter to you. And so I think that authenticity and how you approach people is very, very important. How do you establish that authenticity? I think it starts with connection, right? It starts with authentically connecting. And that means knowing yourself well enough to know that, you cannot, say something that, people are going to question or people aren't going to buy, and not try to tell people things that you don't understand or you don't know. But be very open about the fact that you're in an uncertain time. But also be very clear about what you do know. We do know that safety protocols can help minimize risk to people. I was with last week our entire production operation. We have about 100 people in a clean room operation that make our products, and they've been diligently working through this period, making our products for people and physician customers. And I was in the clean room with them, and someone asked me the question, are we safe? And I said, I immediately thought to myself, I don't know that I can answer this question the way I'd like to. I said, but what I did say was, you're as safe as we can make you, right? In this environment. And here's all the reasons we know that, right? But here's also what we don't know. We don't know everything about this disease, and we don't know everything about how it travels and how it spreads. But we know we can maintain protocols that keep you as safe as possible. And here are all the protocols that we got in place. So I think that authenticity is what builds trust. In fact, I got numerous calls and emails from people after that meeting saying, thank you for just being straight with us, And so I think that's what people look for in times of crisis, and it's what they look for in general, is consistency in leadership.
Charlie, if I just pinged you on the other side of that, what in this environment, what's the one thing a leader shouldn't do, because it'll erode trust and really create an environment that's worse than it already might be in terms of fear and anxiety?
Yeah, I think it's important not to let, to sort of, I'll say, check yourself, right? To have enough personal awareness and presence about your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own emotions, so that those don't become the way you lead. I think that can be very dangerous for organizations. And Rick talked about it a little bit earlier in a little bit different way, but I think it's super, super important that you check your own biases, you check your own emotions, and you don't let those be the message to people. I have seen leaders in this crisis, allow themselves to let their own fear and their own anxiety guide their thoughts and their behaviors and their decisions. And I think that's very dangerous for other people, and it's dangerous for organizations as well.
Great, thanks, super. Dr. Lofgren, just your thoughts on how do you build trust, or even what really does build trust and what erodes trust during times like this when we have high levels of fear and uncertainty?
I'd echo much of what Charlie said. I think that probably the most important thing is to be genuine and open and honest, and acknowledging really the human element of this pandemic. So, in communicating, I think is important, as I said, is like to be calm, confident, but to be realistic, to tell it straight. As Charlie's mentioned, if you don't know, simply say you don't know. I think about the Stockdale analogy. Don't give people false hope when you don't actually know. When are we going to be back to full strength? I don't know. I do know that we have these paths forward, and I think people are much more appreciative when you tell it straight and they don't feel like you're sugarcoating it. I think the other piece around this always is that one of the elements I think underpinning trust is respect. And respect of everybody in the workforce is being in this together, and that they deserve to know information as much as anybody else, and so that you're very genuine about that as well. The other thing that I would say in terms of the communications element is in this time is getting back to, first and foremost, is leading with an understanding of where your workforce and your colleagues are. This is about the whole characteristic of empathy is the ability to walk in somebody else's shoes. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, that we're all anxious, that this is, to say it's unprecedented doesn't talk about the level of disruption. Everybody else's lives and their families and everything and their routines have been upheaval. And to acknowledge that, I think, is actually important as well. Again, not to be Pollyannish. And I think one of the other elements to this in the communications to build the trust is making sure that you spend more time than ever in explaining the why behind the decisions. We had to face the fact that we lost, 35% of our revenue, that the industry crashed, the healthcare industry crashed as hard as any industry. It ultimately was necessary to reduce our labor costs by 20%. And there are a couple of critical messages we had when we actually introduced that. One is we explained the financial realities of this so that people understood. At some level in the organization, gee, you're in healthcare, you should be busier than ever. Well, that's just not the reality. So they understand, they take the time to make sure you respect everybody in the organization so they can understand where we stood as a business, where we stand as an organization, why this particular action was necessary. And the second piece, getting back to the people part of our messaging is that our priority in doing that was to preserve jobs and to preserve benefits as we get through this element, and that we're all going to shoulder this together. And I think that delivering that tough message about where we were in terms of our labor reduction was actually, I think, went reasonably well because we spent a lot of time talking about the why. Not just announcing what we're going to do, but more importantly about why we're going to do this. With all the uncertainty that's in the environment right now, I think one of those ways in which you build trust is the ability to make sure you respect everybody in the organization and spend the time so that they understand the whys behind it as well, so they can join with you and strengthen the organization.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Charlie, I'm going to go back to you for a question. This is, maybe a personal bias I have, and that is, I think I learned somewhere during my journey that, adversity has a gift in it every single time. And you can either try to shy away from it, or you can either just wait for it to disappear, or you can pray that it goes away, or whatever you're, inclined to do. But there is also the realization that in every adverse situation, there's a gift. And if you look for it and find it, it can make you better than you would have been without the adverse conditions. So, if I ask you a kind of an interesting question, Charlie, what is the gift in the current pandemic, which seems counterintuitive, but if you look for it, what would you say might be the gift for all of us as we consider the environment we are in that could make us better than we would have ever been without the challenges we face?
It's an outstanding question, Jim, and it's one I think we as a human race are asking ourselves at the moment, because in times of great crisis, the most important question is, what are we learning from this, right? And how do we apply that learning so that we are better going forward? I think there are a number of gifts in the current scenario that are afforded to us. One is a gift of connection. And I don't just mean transactional connection through technology. We certainly have that. We've learned to adapt very quickly using technological means and new ways of working and new ways of talking and collaborating with each other. But I really mean relational connection, right? We're all forced with a fundamental question. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? What does this mean for my organization, my team, my community, the society that I'm part of? So I think that sense of connection and relational connection is a great gift that we're given in times of crisis, and we're forced to actually examine that. I think the other thing is businesses are largely, when we're in our daily life and we're going through the motions and doing our things, businesses are often transactional, and they're often talked about in transactional terms, right? Even customer relationships are talked about in transactional terms. Now we're really talking about not what value do we create, but what's the purpose and meaning behind that for ourselves, for our family, for our organizations. Never before have leaders and organizations had to focus so intently on the mission, the purpose, the meaning of what we do. In our case, our purpose is very clear. We help save people's lives. In Rick's case, he's leading an organization that does that each and every day. So, we're not focused on what value we're trying to create. We're focused on why we're here in the first place. Gets back to Rick's observation about you spend 10% talking about what and 90% talking about why, right? So I think the second gift is presence. These situations and scenarios that we find ourselves in currently in this crisis force us to be more present, to listen to ourselves, to listen to others, to have empathy. And you can't really truly connect without those things. I think a third gift at really the societal level is innovation. I mean, the amount of innovation that's happening as we speak in this moment is greater than it's ever been in human history. We found a single common enemy to rally against, and industries and organizations, and no matter what business you're in, I talk to leaders every day from various industries, and we're all fighting the same enemy at the moment. And never before have we rallied like that as a human race. And I think that's just unprecedented. So the level of innovation. And then the final gift, I think, is we've learned about our own ability to, our willingness to change is directly proportional to, oftentimes, normal times, directly proportional to how much suffering we experience, right? If we only have a tiny bit of suffering, well, we're not really willing to change because we don't have to change. This has caused us to have to adapt significantly as individuals, as organizations, as a society, and not just in the short term, but I think in the long term as well. And so I think our ability to adapt is a great gift. It's teaching us that, whether it's us as a individual person, us as a team or family unit, us as an organization, or in our own communities, or even more broadly as a society or a government or a country or a world, we're adapting faster than we ever thought we could. And I think that's an immense gift.
Great. Thank you. Rick, how about your thoughts on what's the gift in the current environment that we ought not miss and if we pay attention, could take full advantage of?
I'm going to echo some of what Charlie said. I think the thing that I would start with, and have thought about this in the middle of this, is the demonstration of the power, and I would say is the power of collaboration. And the people have been impressed, I think, both inside the organization and outside the organization, of what can happen when you actually figure out how to collaborate. As a community level, one of the things when this pandemic hit, all of the competitive health systems got together and said, over the next several months, we're no longer competitors, we're collaborators, that we really here to meet the needs of this pandemic facing our community. And what we were able to accomplish in that period of time was remarkable, and I think actually will be enduring, to say, we can serve our community better and really live into our purpose, and if we actually are more effective in the collaboration of that. And I would say the same thing is actually really true inside the organization as well. We mobilized a team to lead our COVID-19 response team that required all the dimensions of our organization to come together and really looked at the way in which we collaborate. And it really allowed us to move mountains quickly and to be remarkably nimble. And being nimble is nothing, there's never been, academic health systems have never been accused of being nimble. And so I think we've actually demonstrated the value of that. I think similarly along the way, we've also seen the value of focusing your energies around a mutual goal. I think Charlie mentioned that we have a common enemy here. We have a mutual goal. And when people come together to focus on a goal rather than their individual agendas, we've been able to really make some remarkable progress in a very short period of time. So I think the value of collaboration and the value of really focusing on mutual goals are lessons that I know our organization has learned. I also am hearkened by sort of that Darwinian element to this, is that, it's not the strongest or the smartest, but the most adaptable that's going to survive. And I think that we've had clear demonstrations of that. It's really, you're going to have to change your routines and habits, not only for the immediate response, but as we emerge from this, we're going to be at different organizations, and how we adapt to those changes, I think are very important. And the final one that I would add is also, I think Charlie mentioned, for our organization, has been the value of the technology. So I think our industry, for example, will be permanently changed in terms of moving forward about how useful telehealth is, for example. I think the other one on a personal note is that because of all the challenges to how it become visible, I've actually started having a 15-minute live broadcast with myself, with all 11,000 associates 3 times a week, in which I provide brief updates and really allow them to ask questions. And the power of understanding what's happening in the organization very quickly has been a real gift for me personally, and understanding how to leverage, and I have not used that in the past. So to me, the power of collaboration, focusing on goals, understanding that it's about adaptability that's really going to allow you to thrive, and leveraging the technology that's been around us is sort of the things that I've already taken away from this pandemic as an organization.
Great. Thanks, Rick. We have one last question for both of you, and we can frame it in a lot of different ways, but it's probably back to what advice would you give a leader at any level? Not just a leader that might be, at the senior level, but a leader, in the middle of the organization, or a leader that may be brand new and really trying to guide 3 or 4 people for the first time. What is the most important, either action, behavior, or just, again, advice you might give to any leaders that are trying to be the best version of themselves during this time? So, Rick, what's your advice to any leader that you think is really important for them to lead well in today's environment?
So I think the first thing I would say is to be present both personally and emotionally. I think the second thing that comes to mind is something that I heard a while ago and I found to be more true than ever, is that great leaders don't have great answers. Great leaders actually ask great questions. And so I think being curious and inquisitive is actually very important. I also think at this point in time, it's also the importance of empathy, understanding how the various elements of your organization are experiencing the changes is very important. The other thing that we've touched upon, and Charlie mentioned it quite well, is the importance of unwavering honesty. And I think that gets back to the authenticity. Say what you know, say what you don't know, and to be very present about that. And I also think it's a very important time to lean on your organization's purpose and values. That for us, our purpose statement is fairly simple. We're here to advance healing and reduce suffering. And we have our values that we lead, and we really demonstrate those. So I think leaning on those core values, that is the foundation of your organization, is more important than ever.
Awesome. Thank you. Charlie, how about your thoughts? What's your advice to a leader at any level of an organization that really wants to do the best they can for their people, with their people during today's challenging times?
Yeah, I think Rick said it very well. I think it starts with lead with your ears and your eyes and not your mouth. I think you got to listen, you got to observe, because you can't genuinely connect and be present for other people. And the biggest mistake leaders often make is, and it's made even in these times, is assuming you know what's in people's mind or what's in their heart. And I think you have to take the time to try to understand that. I just had an example of that last evening where we've gone through changes, just like Rick mentioned, in his health system. We've had to make some difficult decisions in this time. And, some of our most valuable contributors, most important contributors who serve physicians and patients, when we make difficult decisions, reach out and say, am I okay? Is this going to be okay? And, in organizations, you think of your high performers and you think of that, whatever that top echelon of performance is, and you go, oh, those people get it. We don't have to worry about them. But you know what? You do. You have to check in. You have to listen, because those people too, in this time, are asking the same fundamental questions. Am I okay? Will we be okay? And so I think it's lead with your eyes and your ears, not your mouth. I think then also, Rick also said this, then connect people back to the purpose and meaning of the organization, whether it's your values or your mission or whatever it is, that important connectivity, that sinew that connects people to what you do. It's really important to continuously reinforce that. Our mission is to change the field of electrophysiology by making procedures faster and creating better outcomes. So we change people's lives and make physicians' jobs easier. To me, we continuously talk about that each and every day. Even in our daily stand-up, the first thing we put up when we have a meeting is the value structure that leads and guides us. We start with science, but we're driven by people, right? We are tenacious about innovation. We put ourselves before, and our mission before our individual agendas, to Rick's point. I think reconnecting people every day to those things is fundamentally important, but you can't do that if you don't lead with your eyes and ears first and not your mouth.
Well, I can't thank both of you enough. Dr. Lofgren, Charlie, your insights, I think, are just going to be, just cherished by many people that are just trying to get better and trying to be current and trying to be relevant and just lead. Lead with the words that you've used and lead with the examples you've provided. So, on behalf of the entire Root family, thank you for spending this time. Thank you for your insights and your wisdom. And most importantly, thank you for just being you. I think, just being associated with both of you suggests that, to Rick, your point, hope is a part of leadership, and you're just great emissaries for that hope. So thank you again. And we really appreciate your time and, more importantly, your wisdom and your insights. Take care.
Thank you,
Jim. It's been a pleasure being with you, and namaste to you and the Root team, and to everyone out there.
Yep. Thank
Awesome.
you dearly, and be safe.
Yes. Thanks, guys.